Lightning cleaved the midnight sky above Devil's Crossing, illuminating a tableau of primal betrayal. 12-year-old Clara Matthews's bloodied feet slipped in the mud as she fought to shield her sister Annie from both the stinging rain and their father's iron grip. The fresh gash above Clara's eye throbbed where Jeremiah Matthews had struck her with his wedding ring, the same ring her mother had once believed symbolized protection, not terror. "Please, Pa," Clara pleaded, her voice nearly lost in the storm's fury. "We're your daughters." Jeremiah twisted her arm until something snapped inside. Clara bit back a scream, determined not to frighten Annie more than the 10-year-old already was. "Daughters," Jeremiah snarled, his face contorted with a hatred that transcended mere drunkenness. "You're nothing but payment. Madame Blackwood's been waiting for this day since you were born." Clara's blood turned to ice. What? Jeremiah's laugh was hollow, demonic. "Why do you think I married your ma? The deal was made before you drew breath, her first daughters for my gambling debts. 12 years of waiting, watching you grow just right." His eyes held a darkness beyond alcohol. "Tonight she collects." Behind them, their mother's desperate screams faded as a neighbor restrained her. The woman who had never stood against her husband's brutality had finally found her voice too late to save her children from a fate arranged before their birth. The Scarlet Peacock Saloon loomed ahead, its blood-red door seeming to pulse like an exposed heart in the storm-racked night. Jeremiah kicked it open, dragging his daughters into an inferno of smoke, cheap perfume, and predatory gazes. The piano player faltered mid-note as conversations died, and every eye turned toward the rain-soaked children. "Madam Blackwood," Jeremiah bellowed. "I've brought what's yours." A statuesque woman emerged from behind a beaded curtain that clinked like tiny bones. Her face was painted with unnatural precision, but her eyes assessed Clara and Annie with the clinical detachment of a butcher selecting cuts of meat. "Finally," she breathed, her voice cultured yet venomous. "I'd begun to think you'd forgotten our arrangement, Matthews." "Took 12 years, but here they are," Jeremiah replied, shoving the girls forward so roughly that Annie stumbled to her knees. "Pretty enough to fetch triple my debt, I'd wager." Madam Blackwood circled them slowly, lifting Clara's chin with a gloved finger whose touch felt like a spider crawling across her skin. "The older one has spirit that will need breaking." Her gaze shifted to Annie, crumpled on the floor. "This one's eyes, exquisite. Men will pay especially for those innocent eyes." Clara stepped protectively in front of Annie, her voice finding new strength. "Don't touch her." The slap came instantly, splitting her lip. Blood mixed with rainwater on her chin as Madam Blackwood leaned close. "Lesson 1, child, you are merchandise now." Merchandise doesn't speak unless spoken to. From her position on the floor, Clara suddenly noticed a still figure watching from the darkest corner of the room. A native man, whose obsidian eyes seemed to absorb rather than reflect the lamplight. His face remained expressionless, yet something in his steady gaze suggested a predator assessing prey. Though whether that prey was the girls or their tormentors remained unclear. A man materialized with papers. Jeremiah scrawled his name without reading, officially transferring guardianship of his daughters in exchange for the cancellation of debts, whose true nature Clara was only beginning to comprehend. "Pa, please," Annie sobbed as Jeremiah turned to leave. "Don't leave us here." Jeremiah paused at the door, and for one heartbreaking moment, Clara thought something human might stir within him. Instead, he drew a small doll from his pocket, Annie's favorite left behind in their hasty departure, and tossed it contemptuously at Madam Blackwood's feet. "She sleeps better with it." He muttered a final twisted act of fatherhood before disappearing into the storm that seemed tame compared to the hell he delivered his daughters into. The moment the door closed, Madam Blackwood's false smile vanished. She seized Annie by her hair, yanking the child's head back until her throat was exposed like a sacrifice. "Make any trouble, and I'll slit your sister's pretty neck." Her gaze shifted to Clara. The same applies to you. Understand? Clara nodded, tasting blood and defeat. Rosie. Madame Blackwood snapped her fingers, summoning a hollow-eyed young woman. Take them upstairs. Clean them up. The little one starts serving tonight. The older one. Her gaze crawled over Clara's developing figure. Mr. Barlow has been asking for something fresh. He's paid to break her in personally. As Rosie led them up creaking stairs, Clara caught one last glimpse of the native man in the corner. He was gone, or perhaps had never been there at all, just a phantom of desperate hope, in a place where hope had never survived the night. The room they were taken to stank of cheap perfume and despair. A cracked mirror reflected their terror back at them. Strip. Rosie ordered, though her eyes held a glimmer of something that might once have been compassion. When Clara hesitated, Rosie lowered her voice. Listen carefully. I was 13 when I came here. Fighting only makes it worse. Someone comes, you let them have what they want. Save your strength. Watch for chances not to fight to survive. As they removed their sodden clothes, Clara whispered to Annie, Stay close to me. No matter what happens, we stay together. Annie nodded, tears streaming silently down her face as she clutched the doll their father had discarded, the one small mercy Rosie had retrieved for her. Rosie pulled garments from a heap in the corner for Annie, a grotesque parody of a child's dress, cut scandalously short. For Clara, a woman's costume that exposed more than it covered. Put these on, Rosie said. As Clara reached for the offensive garment, Rosie gripped her wrist, urgent and secretive. There's a man who sometimes comes here, an Apache. The others call him Nighthawk. If you see him again, try to speak to him when no one's watching. He's helped girls before. Before Clara could ask, more heavy footsteps approached the door. Madame Blackwood burst in, her painted face twisted with impatience. Enough dawdling, get them downstairs. The customers are waiting. The following hours blurred into a nightmare. Clara would later struggle to sequence fragments of horror pieced together like shattered glass. Annie staggering under the weight of drink trays, men's hands grabbing, pinching, Madame Blackwood's constant hissed threats about what would happen if they disobeyed. And Mr. Barlow, a mountain of a man, with eyes like empty graves, watching Clara with the patience of a predator, confident its prey couldn't escape. When Clara intervened as a drunk cowboy poured whiskey over Annie's head, Madame Blackwood dragged her to a windowless storeroom at the back. First lesson. The madam snarled, pressing Clara against shelves stacked with liquor bottles until their edges bit into her back. She withdrew a thin blade from her sleeve, tracing it along Clara's cheek without quite breaking skin. Your sister serves drinks or she serves men. Understand the difference? The door slammed shut, leaving Clara in absolute darkness that smelled of mold and spilled alcohol. She sank to the floor, finally allowing herself silent, racking sobs. Hours later, or perhaps minutes' time, had lost meaning. The door opened. Madame Blackwood stood silhouetted against the light, her expression triumphant. Mr. Barlow is waiting, and he's paid handsomely for your company. Clara's blood turned to ice. As she walked upstairs on trembling legs, she caught a glimpse of Annie being cornered by a leering patron, whose hands were already wandering where they shouldn't. The absolute helplessness of that moment crystallized something in Clara. If they didn't escape soon, innocence wouldn't be the only thing they lost here. Mr. Barlow's meaty hand closed around her arm, steering her toward a private room. Don't look so frightened, girl. He chuckled, the sound like stones grinding together. I paid extra to be your first. The room door clicked shut behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. Miles, from Devil's Crossing Nighthawk, stared into dancing flames, his weathered face carved with shadows. At 42, he carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows in the lines around his eyes, in the set of his jaw. Once respected among the Apache, he now lived between worlds, unwelcome among whites, unable to fully return to his people after the blood price his vengeance had exacted. His thoughts returned to what he had witnessed in the Scarlet Peacock children being traded like cattle. The older girl's defiance in the face of terror. It awakened memories he had spent years burying of finding his wife, singing bird, and daughter, Little Fawn, butchered by soldiers who had seen them as less than human. Nighthawk had not gone to Devil's Crossing by accident. Whispers had reached even his isolated camp of Madame Blackwood's newest acquisitions, children sold by their own father. He had gone to confirm with his own eyes, disguised as just another drifter passing through. But there was more connection he couldn't yet define. Something about the older girl's eyes, defiant despite her fear, had stirred recognition. As if he'd seen those eyes before, in another life. He reached for his knife, testing its edge against his thumb. It had been years since he had willingly spilled blood. After losing his family, he had turned away from violence, believing it had claimed too much already. But sometimes Nighthawk reflected justice required a steady hand and a sharp blade. The white man's law would do nothing for these girls. In Devil's Crossing, Madame Blackwood was the law protected by the very men who should have stopped her. He would return tonight. Not as a customer, not as an observer, but as judgment itself. In Mr. Barlow's room, Clara backed against the wall, her mind racing desperately for escape. Her hand found a heavy glass paperweight on the dresser. "Please," she whispered, though she knew pleading was useless. "I'm only 12. Barlow laughed, unbuttoning his vest. "That's what I paid extra for, girl." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small vial. "Madame says you might be difficult. This'll make you cooperative, or at least unable to fight much." As he advanced, Clara swung the paperweight with all her strength. It connected with his temple with a sickening crack. Barlow staggered, more surprised than hurt, before his expression contorted with rage. "You little bitch." His backhand caught her across the face with such force that she slammed into the wall stars, exploding in her vision as the paperweight fell from her grasp. His hands closed around her throat. "I was going to be gentle." The door didn't just open, it exploded inward, as if struck by lightning hinges tearing free from the frame. Barlow turned, loosening his grip enough for Clara to gasp a desperate breath. The native man from downstairs filled the doorway, his presence expanding to consume the room. Up close, Clara could see his features clearly, copper skin, stretched over high cheekbones, obsidian eyes burning with controlled fury. Long black hair tied back to reveal a face marked with both physical and spiritual scars. "What the hell do you want, Injun?" Barlow snarled, though Clara noted the tremor of fear in his voice. The stranger didn't answer. He stepped into the room with fluid grace that belied his size. In one swift motion, he drew a knife from his belt, the blade catching lamplight like captured lightning. "You paid for a crime." The stranger finally spoke, his deep voice, accented but clear. "A crime against a child." Barlow lunged for his coat hanging nearby, reaching for what Clara assumed was a hidden gun. He never completed the motion. The stranger moved with impossible speed, his fist connecting with Barlow's jaw with bone-shattering force. As Barlow crashed to the floor, the stranger was on him, instantly pressing the knife against his throat with enough pressure to draw a thin line of blood. "How many children have you hurt?" he demanded, his voice deadly quiet. "It's business," Barlow gasped. "Everyone does it, Madame Blackwood. We'll join you in hell, tonight or another night. But you?" The stranger's expression remained unnervingly calm as he pressed the blade deeper. "Your journey ends now." Clara turned away, but couldn't block out the wet, gurgling sound that followed brief, terrible final. When she looked back, Barlow lay motionless, the stranger wiping his blade clean on the dead man's shirt with methodical precision. Rising smoothly, the stranger turned to Clara, who pressed herself against the wall, uncertain whether she'd been rescued or simply passed from one danger to another. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Clara." She managed, her throat painful from Barlow's assault. "Clara Matthews. You have a sister." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. "Annie, She's downstairs. Please, if you're going to help us, we need to get her too. That's why I'm here. He moved to the window, scanning the alley below. My name is Nighthawk. I'm going to get you both out, but you must do exactly as I say. Clara nodded, hope and fear warring within her. Why are you helping us? Nighthawk's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because no one helped my daughter when she needed it. He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't ask. The grief in those few words was explanation enough. There will be chaos soon, he continued. When it starts, come downstairs. Your sister will be near the back door. I'll find you there. He moved back toward the door, pausing to retrieve something from Barlow's pocket, a small key. Lock the door after me. What happens in this room won't be discovered until we're long gone. After he left, Clara barricaded the door with a chair, then sank to the floor, alternately staring at Barlow's body and the window where escape beckoned. Minutes stretched like hours, until suddenly the floorboards beneath her trembled with a distant concussion. Shouts erupted below, followed by the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. Gathering her courage, Clara removed the chair and cracked the door open. The hallway was empty, everyone apparently drawn to the commotion downstairs. She slipped out, moving toward the stairs, pausing at the landing to survey the scene. What she saw made her breath catch absolute chaos. Tables overturned, men brawling viciously, bottles flying through the air. At the center of the maelstrom stood Nighthawk, systematically creating calculated disorder, whispering something to one man before melting away, as the man threw a punch at another patron, overturning a poker table laden with money, striking invisible sparks into a powder keg of masculine pride and whiskey-fueled aggression. Clara's eyes frantically searched for Annie, finally spotting her pressed against the wall near the kitchen, eyes wide with terror, as men twice her size brawled mere feet away. She had nearly reached her sister when a rough hand seized her arm, spinning her around. "Where do you think you're going?" Madame Blackwood's face was contorted with fury, her carefully applied makeup now resembling war paint. "And where is Mr. Barlow? He paid handsomely for—" Her words cut off as an explosion rocked the building, not from inside the saloon, but from the stables across the street. The distraction gave Clara the opening she needed. She twisted free and grabbed Annie's hand. "Run," she ordered, pushing toward the back door where Nighthawk had promised to meet them. They had nearly reached it when Madame Blackwood's voice rose above the din. "Stop them. The Indian is stealing my property." Two men broke away from the fight, drawing pistols as they turned toward the fleeing sisters. Clara's heart nearly stopped. They'd never make it. A blur of motion intercepted the men. Nighthawk moving with lethal efficiency. The first man went down with a knife thrust that Clara glimpsed only as a flash of silver. The second managed to fire his pistol, the bullet splintering wood inches from Annie's head before Nighthawk drove his palm into the man's nose, sending bone fragments into his brain. "Outside now." Nighthawk ordered, shepherding the girls through the door into the rain-slicked alley. They had just reached the end when a third explosion rocked the night, larger than the previous two. The back wall of the Scarlet Peacock erupted outward in a hail of burning debris. Clara instinctively shielded Annie as heat washed over them in a scorching wave. "Move," Nighthawk urged, pulling them away as flames engulfed the structure with unnatural speed, fed by countless bottles of cheap whiskey and years of seasoned timber. Through the chaos, Nighthawk led them to where a horse waited at the edge of town, already saddled. "Can you ride?" he asked Clara. She nodded, helping Annie mount before climbing up behind her sister. Nighthawk was about to join them when a shot rang out. He staggered, clutching his side. Behind him, illuminated by the inferno consuming the Scarlet Peacock, stood Madame Blackwood. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with soot, but the revolver in her hand remained steady. "They belong to me," she snarled, advancing slowly. "I paid for them. 12 years I waited." Nighthawk straightened, turning to face her despite his wound. "Children belong to no one," he replied calmly. Not even their parents. Philosophical for a savage. She sneered, taking another step forward. I'll find them again, you know. Wherever you hide them, whatever hole you crawl into. I have connections across the territory. Then perhaps it's best if no one leaves to make those connections. Nighthawk's hand moved faster than Clara could follow, flinging something toward Madame Blackwood's feet. The small clay pot shattered, releasing a cloud of caustic powder that enveloped the madam. She fired blindly, the bullet whining past Clara's ear as Madame Blackwood stumbled back, coughing and clawing at her streaming eyes. Nighthawk mounted behind Clara, urging the horse forward. As they galloped away from Devil's Crossing, Clara looked back once. The scarlet peacock was now fully engulfed, a blazing pyre against the night sky. Through the flames, she glimpsed a figure emerging from the inferno Madame Blackwood clothes, smoldering eyes fixed on their retreating forms, with a hatred that transcended pain. She's alive. Clara whispered, a chill running through her, despite the heat at their backs. Yes, Nighthawk confirmed grimly. Some evils are not so easily destroyed. They rode hard through territory. Few white people ever ventured, following game trails only experienced trackers would notice. By dawn, they had reached a sheltered canyon with a small stream, a temporary haven. As Nighthawk tended his wound, a bullet grazed across his ribs, Clara finally voiced the question that had burned in her mind since their escape. Why would you risk yourself for us? You don't even know us. Nighthawk was silent for a long moment, his hand steady as he applied a poultice of herbs to his injury. 8 winters ago, I had a family. A wife, Singing Bird. A daughter, Little Fawn, who would have been your age now, Clara. His voice remained measured, but Clara saw how his jaw tightened. I was hunting when soldiers came. They were drunk, angry about Apache raids that had nothing to do with us. We lived apart from the tribe, trying to find peace between our worlds. He secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. When I returned, they were dead. The soldiers had. He paused, glancing at Annie, who had fallen into exhausted sleep nearby. They had taken what they wanted, then killed them. I'm sorry. Clara whispered inadequate words for such loss. I tracked those men for 2 years. Nighthawk continued, his eyes focused on something distant. Found each one. Made them pay. His gaze returned to Clara. After that, I couldn't return to my people. The path of vengeance separates one from the tribe. We believe such hatred poisons the spirit. So you've been alone all this time, until I heard about 2 sisters sold to Madame Blackwood. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps the spirits guided me to Devil's Crossing. Perhaps they offer a chance to save what I could not save before. As Clara processed this, an unnatural silence fell over the canyon. Birds stopped singing. Insects ceased their constant chorus. Nighthawk's posture changed, instantly alert, as a deer that had caught a hunter's scent. Someone comes, he whispered, reaching for his rifle. He had barely spoken when the air split with the distinctive crack of a hunting rifle. Rock fragments exploded inches from Clara's head as Nighthawk tackled her to the ground, shielding her with his body. Stay down, he ordered, dragging her behind a boulder as a second shot kicked up dust where she had been sitting. Wake Annie, quietly. Clara crawled to her sister, covering Annie's mouth as she gently roused her to prevent any startled cries. We need to be very quiet, she whispered, guiding the confused child to shelter. Nighthawk had already disappeared, moving like a shadow among the rocks to flank their attacker. For agonizing minutes, Clara and Annie huddled together, barely breathing. Then came a brief scuffle, a choked-off cry, and silence. When Nighthawk returned, he was dragging an unconscious man by his collar, a bounty hunter by his gear, likely tracking them from Devil's Crossing. Are there others? Clara asked, her voice tight with fear. Yes. This one was just a scout. Nighthawk bound the man efficiently with leather strips. They're using dogs. They have our scent. The implications hit Clara like ice water. We need to move. Not together. Nighthawk decided grimly. I'll lead them away from you. There's an Apache camp 3 days' journey northeast. Follow the morning star until you reach a river with red rocks. Follow it upstream until you find people. He pressed a small knife into Clara's hand. If I don't return in 2 days, go without me. No, Clara protested. We stay together. Nighthawk gripped her shoulders, his intense gaze boring into hers. Listen to me, Clara. I can move faster alone, create false trails they'll waste days following. You'll only have this one chance to reach safety. Before Clara could argue further, the baying of hounds echoed through the canyon, much closer than expected. Go. Now. Nighthawk urged them toward a hidden path at the canyon's far end. He pressed something else into Clara's hand, a small pouch. Medicine. For Annie's feet. They're bleeding. Clara hadn't even noticed her sister's condition. But the child's bare feet were raw from their escape through Devil's Crossing. The realization of Nighthawk's observant care despite their desperate situation struck her deeply. How will you find us? She asked, fighting tears. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I tracked soldiers across 3 territories in the dead of winter. I'll find 2 girls who want to be found. His expression grew serious again. Now go. And Clara, trust no white man, no matter how kind he seems. With that, Nighthawk mounted his horse and galloped in the opposite direction, deliberately leaving clear tracks for the bounty hunters to follow. Clara pulled Annie into the narrow path. Nighthawk had indicated half carrying her exhausted sister as they climbed steadily upward. Behind them, the baying of hounds grew fainter as they pursued Nighthawk's more obvious trail. By nightfall, they had covered several miles of rough terrain, Annie stumbling with fatigue despite Clara's support. They found shelter beneath an overhanging rock, huddling together against the desert's surprising cold. Will he come back for us? Annie whispered, clutching the doll Rosie had retrieved, her only possession from their former life. Yes, Clara replied with more confidence than she felt. He promised. In truth, she couldn't shake the image of Nighthawk riding directly toward danger, a single man, against what sounded like many pursuers. But she had to believe. The alternative was too frightening to consider. The next day brought new challenges thirst as their water ran low, blistering heat, as the sun climbed higher, mysterious sounds that sent them diving for cover. By sunset, Annie was feverish, the exertion and trauma taking its toll on her small body. Clara applied Nighthawk's medicine to her sister's feet, then to the fever itself, dabbing the bitter-smelling paste on Annie's forehead, as she'd seen her mother do with herbal remedies. It seemed to help Annie's restless movements, calming as night fell. On the morning of the 3rd day, Clara spotted the river Nighthawk had described a ribbon of water cutting through red sandstone. Hope surged within her as she helped Annie to her feet. We're almost there, she encouraged, supporting her weakened sister. Just a little farther. They had followed the river upstream for perhaps an hour when Clara sensed they were being watched. She stopped, eyes scanning the seemingly empty landscape around them. What's wrong? Annie whispered. I don't know, just a feeling. The arrow struck the ground at her feet with such force that it embedded itself to the fletching. Clara froze, pulling Annie closer as 5 Apache warriors materialized from what had appeared to be empty terrain weapons trained on the sisters. One stepped forward, his face painted for war, his expression coldly hostile. He spoke sharply in Apache, gesturing with his bow for them to move. Please, Clara said shakily. Nighthawk sent us. He saved us from bad people. He said your camp would help us. The mention of Nighthawk's name caused a ripple of reaction among the warriors, subtle but unmistakable. The leader studied them with narrowed eyes before speaking in heavily accented English. Nighthawk is known to us, not always welcome. He glanced at Annie's weakened state. But children are sacred, even white children. He gestured again more gently. Come. Camp near. Relief flooded Clara as they were escorted toward what she hoped would be safety. Yet questions nagged at her. Why had Nighthawk not returned as promised? Was he captured dead? And what had the warrior meant about Nighthawk not being welcome? The Apache camp was nothing like Clara had imagined. Nestled between two peaks, with a stream flowing through its center, it seemed almost idyllic. Wiki-Up's dome-shaped dwellings, covered with brush and hides, arranged in a rough circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing among cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmered silver-green in the breeze. But their arrival created an immediate ripple effect, conversations halting women, gathering children, clothes men reaching for weapons. The hostility was palpable, hanging in the air, like the threat of lightning before a storm. Their escort raised his hand, calling out what seemed to be an explanation. From the largest Wiki-Up emerged an elderly woman supported by a walking stick, adorned with feathers and small bells that created a subtle music with each step. Talks with spirits. The warrior said respectfully, stepping aside. The old woman's face was deeply lined, her eyes clouded with cataracts, yet somehow piercing as she studied Clara and Annie. She approached slowly the camp, falling silent in deference to her presence. "So," she said in surprisingly clear English, "Nighthawk sends white children to our camp." She tapped her stick against the ground. The spirits spoke of this, but I did not believe them. Her gaze shifted to Annie, noting her feverish state. "This one needs medicine. The other needs truth." She gestured toward her Wiki-Up. "Bring the sick one to the medicine lodge. The other comes with me." As warriors carefully lifted, Clara protested. "I need to stay with my sister." Talks with spirits fixed her with those unsettling clouded eyes. "Your sister needs healing of the body. You need healing of the spirit. Different medicines for different wounds." Her tone softened slightly. "She will be well tended. This I promise on the bones of my ancestors." Inside the elders' Wiki-Up, Clara told their story, the sail to Madame Blackwood Nighthawk's rescue, their flight, the bounty hunters. Talks with spirits listened impassively, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question that seemed to cut straight to Clara's heart. "Nighthawk has walked alone since his family was murdered," she finally said, sipping a bitter-smelling tea. "His heart died with them, replaced by a hunger for vengeance that separated him from our ways. Yet he returns again and again, like a ghost haunting its own grave. He said someone named Morning Star might help us if he couldn't return," Clara ventured. Something flashed in Talks with Spirits' eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Did he now? Interesting. She set down her cup with deliberate precision. Morning Star was to be his wife, before darkness took him. She has her own pain to carry. "Will you help us find Nighthawk?" Clara asked directly. "He risked everything for us. Find him." The old woman's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Child Nighthawk finds himself in you and your sister. That is why he saved you. That is why he sent you here." She leaned forward. "The question is not whether we will help you find him, but whether you will help him find himself again." Before Clara could decipher this cryptic response, shouting erupted outside, angry male voices rising in what was clearly an argument. Talks with Spirits sighed, reaching for her walking stick. "The council debates your presence already. Some fear white children bring white soldiers. Others remember our own children taken by those same soldiers." She gestured for Clara to follow her outside. "Come. You must speak for yourself and your sister. Truth has power even when unwelcome." The gathering outside reminded Clara of a court stern-faced men, arranged in a rough semicircle with the tribe's members watching from beyond. At the center stood a warrior, whose painted face and elaborate headdress marked him as important a chief or leader. Beside him stood another man, younger, his face a mask of barely contained fury. When he spotted Clara emerging from the wiki up, he spat on the ground. "There," he said in English, clearly for her benefit. "The invasion begins with 2 small spies. Tomorrow's soldiers will come guided by these white snakes." Black Knife speaks from fear, not wisdom. Talks with spirits countered, guiding Clara forward. Let the child speak her truth. Then judge. All eyes turned to Clara, some curious, most hostile, a few merely wary. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run back to Annie's side. "My sister and I were sold by our father to a bad woman in Devil's Crossing." She began, her voice steadier than she felt. "We were to be used for men's pleasures." She saw some of the women exchange knowing glances. This evil at least they understood. "Nighthawk saved us. He killed men who would have hurt us and brought us toward your camp because he said we would be safe here." "Where is Nighthawk now?" the chief asked. "Bounty hunters were tracking us. He led them away so we could reach you safely." Clara's voice finally broke. "He promised to find us, but that was 3 days ago." Murmurs spread through the gathering. Black Knife stepped forward, addressing the chief rather than Clara. "You see, already he brings trouble to our door. First, he abandons our ways for the path of vengeance. Now he sends white children to endanger us all." "The children did not ask to be here," countered an older warrior. "Our ways teach compassion for the innocent." "Innocent." Black Knife's laugh was bitter. "White skin is never innocent. Their very presence is a weapon." The debate continued, voices rising and falling in Apache too rapid for Clara to follow. Finally, the chief raised his hand, silencing the assembly. "The council will deliberate," he announced. "Until then, the children stay under Talks with Spirits protection." He fixed Clara with a penetrating gaze. "If Nighthawk returns, he answers to me for this decision." As the gathering dispersed, Black Knife approached Clara, stopping uncomfortably close. "I lost my entire family to people who looked just like you," he said softly, his English perfect despite his earlier pretense. "My wife, my sons, my infant daughter. White soldiers thought it was sport to dash her brains against rocks while my wife watched." Clara remained silent, understanding that no response could possibly be adequate. "If any harm comes to my people because of your presence," he continued, "I will personally ensure you join your parents in whatever hell white people believe in." "My parents sold us," Clara replied quietly. "I have no love for them or for what they did." Something flickered in Black Knife's eyes, not sympathy, but perhaps a reluctant recognition. Without another word, he turned away, leaving Clara alone with the weight of a people's suspicion bearing down on her shoulders. The next 3 days passed in uneasy limbo. Annie's fever broke under the skilled care of the tribe's healers, but Nighthawk did not return. The sisters were given a small wiki up near Talks with Spirits, neither prisoners nor guests, a status as uncertain as their future. On the 4th morning, as Clara collected water from the stream, a young Apache woman approached her movements, graceful but hesitant. "I am Morning Star." She introduced herself softly, kneeling beside Clara at the stream's edge. "Nighthawk spoke of me to you." Clara nodded, studying the woman closely. Morning Star possessed a quiet beauty, not in the conventional sense prized by white settlers, but in the serene strength that radiated from her, like heat from sun-warmed stone. Her eyes held knowledge of pain, yet hadn't surrendered to it. "He said you might help us if he couldn't return," Clara replied cautiously. Morning Star's hands stilled in the water. "There was a time I would have refused simply because he asked." She gathered her thoughts before continuing. "Nighthawk and I were to be married before his family was taken. After that, vengeance consumed him. He chose a path our people consider spiritual poison. He saved us. Clara said simply. Whatever he was before he risked everything for 2 children, he didn't know. That Morning Star's voice softened. Is why I'm here now. The Nighthawk I knew died with his family. The man who saved you, perhaps he's finding his way back to himself. She met Clara's eyes directly. Tell me everything. Leave nothing out. Clara recounted their rescue in detail. Nighthawk's calculated chaos at the Scarlet Peacock, his mercy toward her and Annie, his self-sacrifice in leading away the bounty hunters. With each word, Morning Star's expression grew more intent, as if piecing together a puzzle whose final image might change everything. He killed for you, she observed when Clara finished. Not from vengeance, but protection. That distinction matters deeply to our people. A commotion at the camp's edge interrupted them, warriors returning from patrol, supporting a figure between them. Even at a distance, Clara recognized Nighthawk's distinctive silhouette, though he seemed barely able to stand. Morning Star was already running Clara close behind. They reached Nighthawk as he was being lowered to the ground, his clothing torn and bloodied, his face a mask of exhaustion and pain. Bounty hunters, he managed through cracked lips. Still coming, many, led by... He coughed, blood speckling his chin. Don't speak, Morning Star ordered, examining a vicious wound in his side that went far deeper than the original bullet graze. We need to get him to the medicine lodge. As warriors carefully lifted Nighthawk, his hand shot out, gripping Clara's wrist with surprising strength. The girls, he gasped. Safe. We're both here. Clara assured him, tears pricking her eyes at his concern, even in his desperate state. Annie's recovering from fever. We're okay. Relief washed over his features before unconsciousness claimed him. As he was carried away, the chief approached, his expression grave. He spoke of pursuers, he said to Clara, who hunts him with such determination, bounty hunters hired by Madame Blackwood. Clara answered, the woman we escaped from. Clara hesitated, then decided the full truth was necessary. She owns the brothel in Devil's Crossing. She paid our father for us years before we were even born. She won't stop until she gets what she believes is hers. The chief's face hardened. Then we prepare. If these hunters come, they will find Apache warriors, not helpless prey. Black Knife materialized beside them, having overheard the exchange. So it begins, he said bitterly. First 2 white girls, then hunters, next soldiers. All because Nighthawk cannot leave white problems to white people. These are children, Morning Star countered, rejoining them after seeing Nighthawk settled. Would you have them suffer what your own daughter was spared through death's mercy? Black Knife's expression flickered surprise at her directness, perhaps, or at the brutal truth of her words. Without responding, he stalked away, though Clara noticed his hands trembled slightly at his sides. Over the next 3 days, sentries were doubled, families prepared emergency provisions, and warriors readied weapons. Nighthawk drifted between consciousness and delirium, his wounds infected despite the medicine woman's best efforts. During one lucid moment, he gripped Clara's hand as she sat beside him. I know who leads them, he whispered hoarsely. The preacher. Oh, who is he? Clara asked, chilled by the dread in Nighthawk's voice. A hunter of men. He wears black like a crow, carries a Bible he cannot read, and tracks like he made a deal with darker spirits. Nighthawk's eyes burned with fever. He never fails, Clara. Never stops. And he has some connection to Madame Blackwood, something beyond money. Before he could elaborate, fever claimed him again, pulling him into restless unconsciousness, where he muttered in Apache phrases that made Morning Star's expression tighten when she heard them. On the 4th day, scouts reported riders approaching from the east, 12 men, led by a tall figure in black. The preacher had found them. The chief ordered immediate evacuation, families splitting into smaller groups to scatter into the surrounding wilderness, a strategy honed through generations of conflict with both Spanish and American forces. "You'll go with the medicine group," Morning Star told Clara and Annie, helping them gather minimal provisions. "Nighthawk comes too, though moving him is dangerous." "What about you?" Clara asked, noticing Morning Star preparing weapons rather than travel packs. "I stay with the warriors. We will delay these hunters create false trails." Her expression softened at Clara's obvious concern. "This is not your burden to carry, Clara. You've survived enough." "But it's because of us they're here," Clara protested. "We can't just run while others fight our battles." Morning Star studied her with newfound respect. "You have an Apache heart in your white body," she observed quietly. "But this time running is the braver choice. Nighthawk needs you, both of you. His spirit walks between worlds now. Familiar voices may guide him back." As final preparations were made, an unexpected figure approached their wiki-up black knife, his expression inscrutable. "I will guide your group personally," he announced, the statement clearly costing him considerable pride. "I know hidden paths others have forgotten." Clara couldn't hide her surprise. "You've made it clear you want us gone. Why help now?" Black Knife's eyes narrowed. "Because Nighthawk once saved my life, though I never thanked him for it. Because these hunters threaten all Apache, not just you. And because," he hesitated fractionally, "children deserve protection, even white ones." Within the hour, they departed. A small group consisting of Clara, Annie, the unconscious Nighthawk, carried on a travois, an elderly medicine woman named White Sage, and Black Knife, leading them through terrain so rugged, Clara wondered how anyone could navigate it. "Where are we going?" she finally asked after hours of punishing travel. "A hidden canyon," Black Knife replied tersely. "Sacred place, few know of it." "Will the others be safe?" Annie asked, finding her voice for the first time since Nighthawk's return. "The ones staying behind." Something close to respect flickered in Black Knife's expression at the child's concern for people who had shown her little warmth. "Apache warriors have been disappearing into these mountains since before your people knew this land existed. They will lead the hunters in circles until they die of thirst or frustration." By nightfall, they had reached terrain so vertical and fractured that Clara feared the travois would be impossible to manage. Black Knife solved this by constructing a complex harness that distributed Nighthawk's weight between himself and the two hardiest pack horses. They made camp in a shallow cave, its entrance nearly invisible from the valley below. As White Sage tended Nighthawk's fever, Black Knife took Clara aside. "Tomorrow we reach the canyon, but the path is treacherous, barely wide enough for a single file with a drop that would kill instantly." His eyes bored into hers. "Your sister is small and frightened. She must be perfectly steady. Can you ensure this?" Clara nodded, though anxiety clutched at her heart. "I'll keep her calm." "See that you do. One misstep means death for her, and likely whoever tries to save her." With that cheerful assessment, he returned to securing their perimeter. That night, as the others slept, Clara sat beside Nighthawk's fevered form. His condition had worsened. Despite White Sage's ministrations, infection spreading from his wound, his breathing labored. "Us don't die," Clara whispered fiercely, gripping his burning hand. "Not for us. Not after everything." To her shock, Nighthawk's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with unexpected clarity. "Little fawn," he murmured clearly, mistaking her for his dead daughter. Clara hesitated only a moment. "I'm here, Father," she replied softly, offering what comfort she could. A smile of such profound peace transformed his face that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "I found you," he whispered. "In the darkness, I found you." "Yes." Clara agreed, throat tight with emotion. You found me. Now rest. Gather your strength." His eyes drifted closed, but his breathing seemed easier, his expression relaxed rather than pained. Clara maintained her vigil, until dawn broke, wondering if she had witnessed a turning point or a final moment of peace before the end. The path to the hidden canyon proved exactly as harrowing, as Black Knife had warned, a narrow ledge barely wide enough for single file, with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet on one side. Annie, terrified of heights, clung to Clara's hand, with white-knuckled intensity, her small face rigid with determination. Not to show fear. "Look at me, not down," Clara instructed gently as they inched forward. "One step at a time. I won't let anything happen to you." Behind them, Black Knife and White Sage managed the travois with Nighthawk, an engineering feat that required such precise coordination that they moved at half their previous pace. They had nearly reached the widest section of ledge when disaster struck. A portion of the path crumbled beneath Annie's foot, sending rocks clattering into the abyss below. She screamed, slipping toward the edge, before Clara yanked her back with such force that both girls slammed against the canyon wall. "Keep moving," Black Knife ordered sharply, his voice carrying above Annie's terrified sobs. "That scream will carry for miles in this terrain." Clara half-carried, half-dragged her sister forward, reaching the relative safety of a wider section where the path turned inward through a crevice in the rock face. Beyond this narrow opening lay their sanctuary, a hidden canyon of such breathtaking beauty that both girls momentarily forgot their fear. A spring-fed pool reflected towering red cliffs surrounded by improbably lush vegetation. Ancient pictographs adorned the sheltered walls, telling stories Clara couldn't read but instinctively recognized as sacred. At the far end, a cave mouth yawned its entrance, partially obscured by hanging vines. "Spirits have blessed this place since before time was measured." White Sage explained her first words since they departed camp. "Water always flows. Plants always grow. Even in the worst drought, this place remains green." They established Nighthawk in the cave cooler than outside, yet somehow dry and comfortable. White Sage immediately began preparing new medicines from plants gathered around the pool, muttering prayers or incantations as she worked. Black Knife disappeared back toward the path, presumably to erase any signs of their passage. When he returned hours later, his expression was grim. "They found our trail sooner than expected," he reported. "The one they call the Preacher, he tracks like he has a demon's eyes." "How long do we have?" Clara asked, fear tightening her chest. Black Knife's gaze was unflinching. "They will reach the ledge path by tomorrow's dawn. If they risk it, and I believe they will, they could be here by midday." White Sage looked up from her medicines. "Nighthawk cannot be moved again. The journey here nearly killed him. His spirit walks between worlds, now deciding whether to stay or go. Then we make our stand here." Black Knife declared, removing weapons from his pack, a rifle, several knives, and what appeared to be small clay containers similar to what Nighthawk had used during their escape from the Scarlet Peacock. Clara watched him prepare with growing dread. Even with his considerable skill, one man couldn't hope to defeat a dozen experienced bounty hunters. "There must be another way out," she suggested. "A path unknown even to the Preacher." Black Knife paused in his preparations. "There is one possibility, a network of caves that runs beneath the canyon. They emerge miles from here, but—" He shook his head. "The route is treacherous. Complete darkness. Underground rivers. Narrow passages where one wrong turn means being lost forever." "Could you guide us?" Clara pressed. "Perhaps, if we had time to prepare properly. But with Nighthawk unable to walk and your sister—" He gestured toward Annie, who was helping White Sage gather plants, her small face still pale from their ordeal on the ledge. "Some routes are more dangerous than facing enemies directly." That night, as the others slept, Clara slipped out of the cave to sit beside the mirrored pool. Starlight transformed the water into a second sky, infinite mysterious. Her reflection stared back a girl she barely recognized anymore. Not quite Clara Matthews, not quite whoever she was becoming. A slight sound alerted her to Black Knife's approach. He sat nearby, his customary hostility tempered by what might have been respect. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow will demand strength." "I keep thinking there must be something we're missing," Clara replied. "Some way to protect everyone without more bloodshed." Black Knife was silent for a long moment. "There is another option," he finally said, his voice so low Clara had to strain to hear. "One I haven't mentioned because it requires great sacrifice." Clara turned to him, hope and fear mingling in her chest. "What is it?" "The spirits say that if we give them what is most precious, they protect what remains." Black Knife's eyes reflected starlight, ancient and knowing. "To save Nighthawk, your sister, the others, you could offer yourself." Ice flooded Clara's veins. "You mean surrender to the preacher, to Madame Blackwood?" Black Knife nodded once. "Your sister is young. Perhaps they would spare her if they reclaim you. Nighthawk would live. The tribe would be safe." The terrible logic twisted like a knife in Clara's heart. Could she sacrifice herself, return to the life she'd escaped, endure whatever Madame Blackwood planned as punishment to save everyone else? "How would I do it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I would take you down before dawn, lead you to where they camp. Trade you for their departure." Black Knife studied her reaction closely. "It would require great courage." Clara gazed across the water, mind racing. Something in Black Knife's proposal felt wrong. Not just the horror of returning to captivity, but something deeper, a dissonance she couldn't immediately identify. Then it struck her. Nighthawk had risked everything to free them. Would he want his own life purchased at the cost of Clara's freedom? Would he consider that victory or the ultimate defeat? "No," she said finally, certainty hardening her voice. "That's not the answer. Nighthawk didn't save us just so I could walk back into that nightmare. There must be another way." Something shifted in Black Knife's expression. Relief, approval. It vanished too quickly to interpret. "And then we fight," he said simply, rising to his feet. As he turned to go, he added, "You made the right choice, Clara Matthews. Had you agreed too quickly, I would have questioned your understanding of Nighthawk's sacrifice." Clara stared after him, suddenly understanding the offer had been a test. Of what exactly she wasn't entirely certain, but she felt she had passed. Dawn brought new urgency, as Black Knife spotted dust rising from the direction of the ledge path, but the preacher and his men were approaching faster than anticipated, likely having traveled through the night. "We have perhaps 2 hours," he estimated grimly. White Sage emerged from the cave where she had spent the night tending Nighthawk. "He wakes," she announced. "Fever breaks, but he remains weak as newborn." Clara rushed inside, finding Nighthawk propped against the cave wall, his eyes clear for the first time since his return. Despite his obvious weakness, his gaze was sharp, assessing. "Clara," he acknowledged, his voice rough but steady. "Annie is well. She's helping White Sage gather more medicine plants," Clara confirmed, kneeling beside him. "But we have trouble coming the bounty hunters." "I know. I hear Black Knife's preparations." Nighthawk shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wound. "Help me stand." "You can't fight," Clara protested. "You're barely alive." "I don't intend to fight." Nighthawk's expression was resolute. "I intend to end this. Permanently." With Clara's reluctant assistance, Nighthawk made his way outside, moving like an old man rather than a warrior in his prime. Black Knife watched his approach with undisguised skepticism. "You can barely walk," he observed bluntly. "What do you propose to do, fall on the preacher and hope your weight kills him?" Despite everything, Clara had to suppress a startled laugh at Black Knife's unexpected gallows humor. Nighthawk's lips twitched in what might have been appreciation. I have a better plan. He gestured toward the pool. This canyon, it has another name among the older Apache. They call it falling water. Black Knife's eyes widened in sudden understanding. The underground river. Exactly. Nighthawk lowered himself carefully to a rock outcropping. When I was a boy, my grandfather brought me here. Showed me how in ancient times our people would make the canyon appear abandoned, then flood it when enemies entered. Clara looked between them, comprehension dawning. You want to trap them here, then? Flood the canyon? Nighthawk nodded. The river runs beneath us, controlled by a natural dam of rocks and logs at the head of the canyon. Remove enough supports and water fills this place faster than any man can climb out. You'll drown everyone, Clara gasped, including us. Not if we're already in the caves, Nighthawk corrected. The same caves Black Knife considered too dangerous become our only salvation. Black Knife was already nodding, excitement kindling in his normally stoic features. It could work. The narrow path we crossed that the preacher's men will have to come single file. Once they're all in the canyon, Mibarm, we trigger the flood and escape through the rear cave system. Nighthawk finished. But we must work quickly. Prepare everyone for the caves. Take only what we absolutely need. I'll ready the dam. You can barely stand, Clara protested again. Let Black Knife trigger it. Nighthawk shook his head. Black Knife must lead you through the caves. He knows them best. His gaze softened. I will follow once it's done. I promise. Clara didn't believe him, couldn't believe him. The plan required someone to remain behind to trigger the flood once the hunters were fully committed to the canyon. But before she could argue further, Annie's screams shattered the morning stillness. All heads whipped toward the sound. At the far edge of the canyon, Annie stood frozen, a basket of dropped herbs at her feet. 10 feet away, a tall figure in a black coat held a pistol aimed directly at the child's heart. The preacher had found another way in. Nobody move. He called, his voice carrying easily across the canyon, cultured, almost pleasant, utterly at odds with the deadly promise in his stance. I'd hate to put a hole in such a pretty little thing. Behind him emerged more men, not the dozen they'd expected, but only 3. The others were presumably still navigating the ledge path, unaware their leader had found an alternate route. Let her go, Clara called, taking an instinctive step forward. She's just a child. Stay where you are. The preacher countered calmly. Children have a distressing tendency to die when people don't follow instructions. He smiled, a gesture that never reached his ice-blue eyes. Clara Matthews, I presume Madam Blackwood sends her regards. Nighthawk had gone completely still, his expression unreadable as he assessed the situation. Black Knife's hand hovered near his knife, but with Annie as hostage, any aggressive move was unthinkable. What do you want? Clara demanded, playing for time while desperately trying to think of a solution. To what I've been paid for. The preacher replied simply, You and your sister return to your rightful owner. The Apache renegade delivered dead or alive, preferably dead. He glanced around the canyon appreciatively. Beautiful place to die, don't you think? Sacred ground, they say. Something about his casual reference to Apache beliefs raised the hair on Clara's neck. This was no ordinary bounty hunter. You know our ways, Nighthawk observed, clearly thinking along similar lines. How? The preacher's smile widened fractionally. Why, Nighthawk, I'm wounded. You don't recognize me. Though I suppose it has been, 20 years? He removed his wide-brimmed hat, revealing short silver hair and features that, while weathered by time and sun, carried traces of a younger man Nighthawk had once known. The blood drained from Nighthawk's face. Shadow Walker. He breathed the name, clearly significant. Once. The preacher agreed. before I saw the profit in working for those who actually win wars rather than fighting futile battles against them. His gaze hardened. You always were too honorable for your own good, brother. The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. The preacher, the man hunting them threatening Annie working for Madame Blackwood, was Nighthawk's brother, an Apache who had betrayed his own people. You were reported dead. Nighthawk said, struggling to reconcile this development. In the battle at Whitetail Creek, many things were reported. Few were true. The preacher's shadow walker gestured with his free hand, and his men spread out weapons trained on Nighthawk, Black Knife, and Clara. Now let's dispense with reunions. The girls come with me. You and your warrior friend can choose surrender and face white justice, or resist and die here. Nighthawk straightened, despite his weakness dignity replacing shock. You know what Madame Blackwood intends for these children. Once you would have died before allowing such a fate. Once I was a fool who believed in honor above survival. The preacher's expression remained pleasant, but something dead lurked behind his eyes. The white man's world runs on commerce, not honor. These girls are valuable commodities. Nothing more. Clara's mind raced, desperate for some advantage. The preacher's men were focused on the adults as the primary threats, understandable, but a miscalculation. They'd left White Sage unguarded and the elderly medicine woman apparently dismissed as harmless. A barely perceptible movement caught Clara's attention, White Sage slowly reaching into her medicine pouch, extracting something small that glinted in the morning sun. A signal, a tiny mirror flash directed at Black Knife, who blinked once in acknowledgement. You shame our ancestors, Nighthawk was saying, keeping the preacher's attention fixed on him. You shame our parents who gave you your name. Our parents died screaming while cavalry burned our village. The preacher retorted, anger finally cracking his composed facade. Honor didn't save them. It doesn't save anyone. As he spoke, White Sage flashed her mirror again, this time toward the cave entrance, where shadows shifted subtly. Something was happening, some plan Clara wasn't privy to. Perhaps you're right. Nighthawk conceded, moving slightly to his left, positioning himself, Clara realized, to block the preacher's view of the cave. Perhaps honor is a luxury only the living can afford. The preacher's laugh was harsh. Philosophy, brother, now. He gestured with his gun, pressing it closer to Annie's temple. The child whimpered, but remained admirably still. Enough talk. The girls come with me now, or the little one dies first. If you harm her, Nighthawk said with deadly quiet, no force on earth will stop me from sending your soul screaming into darkness. Bold words from a dying man. The preacher sneered, clearly noting Nighthawk's weakened state. What happened next occurred with such blinding speed that Clara would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. From the cave mouth erupted Morning Star Bow, drawn loosing an arrow with surgical precision. It struck the preacher's shoulder, his gun arm causing his shot to go wide as Annie dove for the ground. Simultaneously, White Sage hurled something that shattered at the feet of the nearest bounty hunter, a clay pot containing caustic powder that sent him reeling back, clawing at his eyes. Black Knife exploded into motion, knife flashing as he engaged the second hunter. Nighthawk, summoning strength Clara wouldn't have believed possible, tackled the third man despite his injured state. Run! Morning Star shouted to Clara, already notching another arrow. Get Annie Cave now. Clara sprinted toward her sister, who was crawling desperately away from the preacher. She had nearly reached her when the preacher, arrow still protruding from his shoulder, seized Annie's ankle with his good arm. Not so fast, little bird, he growled, dragging Annie back despite her kicking and screaming. Clara didn't hesitate. She launched herself at the preacher, remembering every dirty fighting technique she'd observed during brawls at the Scarlet Peacock. Her knee connected with his wound, driving the arrow deeper. As he howled in pain, she clawed at his eyes, fighting with the desperation of someone who understood there would be no second chances. The preacher was stronger, more experienced, but wounded and unprepared for such ferocity from a 12-year-old girl. Clara managed to wrench Annie free, shoving her toward the cave where White Sage was urgently gesturing. "Go," she ordered her sister. "I'm right behind you." As Annie scrambled toward safety, the preacher recovered enough to seize Clara's hair, yanking her backward with vicious force. Stars exploded in her vision as her head cracked against stone. "You'll pay for that, girl," he hissed, drawing a wicked knife from his boot. "Madam Blackwood didn't specify what condition you needed to be in, just alive enough to feel what she has planned." The knife descended toward Clara's face. She twisted desperately, the blade slicing her cheek instead of her eye. Blood flowed warm down her face as she fought with renewed terror. Then suddenly, the preacher's weight was gone. Nighthawk had somehow crossed the distance between them, tackling his brother with such force that both men rolled dangerously close to the pool's edge. "Clara, cave now," Nighthawk ordered, grappling with the preacher in a deadly contest of strength and will. Clara scrambled to her feet, racing toward the cave where the others waited. Behind her, she heard Nighthawk shout something in Apache, words clearly meant for Black Knife, who had dispatched his opponent and was now running toward the head of the canyon. The flood. They were triggering the flood. "Hurry," Morning Star urged as Clara reached the cave entrance. Beyond her, White Sage was already leading Annie deeper into the darkness, a torch illuminating a narrow passage that descended sharply. Clara turned back, heart seizing, as she saw Nighthawk still locked in combat with the preacher at the pool's edge. "Nighthawk, we go!" he shouted, blood streaming from fresh wounds as the preacher's knife found its mark again and again. "I'll follow." A lie. Clara knew it with certainty. Nighthawk was sacrificing himself to ensure the preacher could never threaten them again, holding him there until the flood claimed them both. Black Knife reappeared, sprinting across the canyon. "It's done," he called. "Water comes, minutes only." Morning Star seized Clara's arm, pulling her into the cave as the first rumbling vibrations shook the ground. "We must go now. No Nighthawk has chosen his path." Black Knife shouted, herding them both deeper into the cave. Honor it, or his sacrifice means nothing. The last glimpse Clara had of the canyon was Nighthawk, and the preacher still locked together at the pool's edge, brothers bound by blood, divided by choice, united in final combat, as the first torrents of water began cascading down the canyon walls. Then darkness enveloped them as they plunged into the cave system, the roaring of released water pursuing them like the voice of an angry god. The journey through the underground labyrinth was a nightmare of absolute darkness, broken only by their single torch, narrow passages that scraped skin from knees and elbows, and the constant thunder of water flowing through adjacent chambers. Clara moved mechanically, mind numb with shock and grief, responding to Black Knife's terse directions without truly processing them. Hours later, or perhaps days' time, had lost all meaning. They emerged into blinding sunlight miles from the hidden canyon. The small group stood blinking like nocturnal creatures, bodies battered, spirits raw. "What now?" Clara finally asked, voice hollow. Black Knife surveyed their surroundings with the practiced eye of a lifelong warrior. "We find the others. Return to what remains of the tribe. And then—" Clara pressed, needing some purpose to anchor herself against overwhelming loss. Morning Star placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then we honor Nighthawk by living as he died, protecting what matters most." The tribe had regrouped at a secondary location, a defensive position high in the mountains that offered clear sight lines in all directions. Their arrival caused a stir the story of the flood, and Nighthawk's sacrifice spreading rapidly through whispered conversations. That evening, talks with spirits summoned Clara and Annie to her fire. The old woman's face seemed to have aged years in their absence, new lines, etched by grief, for a man many had shunned yet secretly respected. "Nighthawk walks with our ancestors now," she said without preamble. "His spirit is free from the burden of vengeance that haunted him so long." He died for us. Annie whispered her first words since witnessing the horror at the canyon. Like he died for us. Talks with Spirits nodded gravely. Some souls must pay debts from one life to another. Perhaps in saving you, he balanced what he could not change before. Her clouded eyes turned to Clara. The question now is what path you will walk carrying his sacrifice. Before Clara could respond, a shout rose from the perimeter riders approaching. Every warrior reached for weapons until the lead rider was recognized, one of their own scouts returning with news. The report spread quickly. The flood had done its work thoroughly, leaving no survivors in the hidden canyon. The preacher's remaining men, finding their leader vanished and confronted with enraged Apache warriors, had fled back toward Devil's Crossing with tales of supernatural vengeance. Most significantly, a body had been found downstream, not Nighthawk's, but the preacher's. His features frozen in a rictus of hatred even death couldn't erase. Of Nighthawk himself there was no sign. "What does it mean?" Clara asked Morningstar privately as the tribe absorbed this news. "It means hope," Morningstar replied simply. "Until proven otherwise." But days passed with no sign of Nighthawk, and hope gradually transformed into acceptance. A death ceremony was held, not a body buried, but a spirit honored. Clara and Annie watched in respectful silence as the tribe performed rituals both foreign and strangely familiar, celebrating a warrior's courage rather than mourning his absence. After the ceremony, the chief addressed the gathered tribe. "The threat from Devil's Crossing remained," he explained. "The loss of the preacher would only delay Madame Blackwood's vengeance, not prevent it." With soldiers increasingly patrolling their traditional territories, the tribe faced an impossible choice: fight and likely die or surrender to the reservation system that had already claimed so many Apache lives through disease, starvation, and despair. A third option existed: to cross into Mexico, where some Apache bands still maintained freedom in remote mountains. It would mean leaving ancestral lands, undertaking a perilous journey, and facing uncertain reception. But it would mean liberty. "What happens to us?" Annie whispered to Clara as debate raged around them. "Do we go with them?" Clara looked at her sister, smaller and younger, yet somehow stronger than when they'd first fled the Scarlet Peacock. The question wasn't really about geography, but identity. Were they still white girls temporarily sheltered by Apache? Or had they become something else entirely? "We stay together," Clara answered finally. "That's what matters most. The rest we'll figure out along the way." The decision, when it came, was not unanimous, but was clear the majority would journey south, seeking freedom beyond the border. Some would remain unable to leave sacred lands regardless of consequences. Morningstar approached the sisters as preparations began. "You're welcome to come with us," she said simply. "Nighthawk considered you family. So do I." The journey south began 3 days later, a caravan of determined people carrying minimal possessions but maximum resolve. Clara and Annie traveled with Morningstar, their status now clear adopted daughters of a woman who had reclaimed her capacity for love despite her own losses. They had traveled perhaps a week when scouts reported cavalry patrols ahead, not random enforcement, but a dedicated search pattern. Someone was hunting Apache with unusual determination. Madame Blackwood. Clara realized aloud during the council that night. She must have convinced the army we kidnapped white children. Black Knife, who had become an unexpected ally since the canyon, nodded grimly. Using soldiers to pursue her private vengeance. Clever. Now we need a permanent solution. Morningstar said, voicing what many were thinking. Something to end her pursuit forever. Clara's mind raced, piecing together a desperate plan. What if Clara and Annie Matthews died? She suggested slowly. Publicly, undeniably, all eyes turned to her. If Madame Blackwood found evidence, that we died during our escape, remains she could identify possessions that were unmistakably ours. She might finally give up. Clara explained, her mind racing ahead. She needs to believe without doubt that we're beyond her reach. Black Knife leaned forward, intrigued, despite his natural skepticism. How would you convince her? She seems determined. We stage our deaths. Clara replied, the plan crystallizing as she spoke. Create a scene she'll discover remains that look like they've been there for months since our original escape from Devil's Crossing. Bodies. Morning Star questioned, her brow furrowed. Animal bones arranged to suggest 2 children, Clara clarified. Add our original clothes, the ones we wore from the Scarlet Peacock, and personal items she'd recognize. Place them in a location she'd believe we might have fled to and perished. Black Knife's eyes narrowed in consideration. It could work. But the location must be perfect, believable, yet discoverable. Devil's Canyon. Suggested an older warrior. 3 days northeast. Many white children have been lost there over the years. The soldiers avoided calling it haunted. Clara nodded slowly. And we'd need someone to lead Madame Blackwood there, someone she'd trust, but who's actually working with us. Silence fell as they confronted the obvious problem. They had no such person. The Apache were universally mistrusted by whites, especially Madame Blackwood. Then a soft voice spoke from the edge of the gathering. I could do it. All heads turned to see a young Apache woman step forward, perhaps 20 years old, with eyes that carried shadows beyond her years. Clara didn't recognize her, having never seen her in the main camp. Dancing Fox. Black Knife identified her with obvious surprise. You've been tracking us since we left the canyon. The young woman nodded, her gaze fixed on Clara and Annie. I have reasons to help. Morning Star studied her with unconcealed suspicion. What reasons? My brother was killed by soldiers last winter. Dancing Fox explained, her voice steady, despite the pain evident in her eyes. The same soldiers who now search for these children. I want vengeance against those who use white man's power against our people. Something in her tone raised Clara's hackles, a note of intensity that bordered on fanaticism. Yet they needed someone who could move between worlds, and Dancing Fox clearly had her own reasons for helping. How would you do it? Clara asked directly. I trade sometimes at the edge settlements, Dancing Fox replied. The whites know me as merry, docile, helpful. I could spread rumors about finding children's remains while hunting. Eventually word would reach this Madame Blackwood. The plan took shape over hours of discussion, a desperate gambit that required perfect execution. Clara and Annie would contribute personal items for the staged scene. Dancing Fox would plant the evidence, then ensure word reached Madame Blackwood through carefully crafted rumors in frontier settlements. It's dangerous, Morning Star warned as the council disbanded. For Dancing Fox especially. Clara nodded soberly. But if it works, we'll be free. Truly free, not just running. The following days were consumed with preparations. Clara and Annie sorted through their meager possessions, selecting items that Madame Blackwood would recognize unquestionably. Annie's doll, now worn from constant handling. Clara's hairpin, a gift from their mother on her 10th birthday. The distinctive leather boots Nighthawk had crafted for them, deliberately sized to match their feet. Dancing Fox departed with these treasures, accompanied by Black Knife, who would help arrange the scene before returning to the main group. The rest continued southward at a more cautious pace, aware that until confirmation came, they remained hunted. 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Then Black Knife returned, his normally impassive face alight with grim satisfaction. It is done, he announced to the gathered council. Dancing Fox played her role perfectly. The brothel woman arrived with soldiers yesterday, discovered the scene exactly as planned. And Clara prompted heart-pounding. She believed it completely. Black Knife confirmed. I watched from hiding as she examined the remains. She wept not from grief, but rage at being cheated of her vengeance. The soldiers documented everything, declared the case of the kidnapped Matthews sisters officially closed. Relief cascaded through Clara so powerfully she nearly collapsed. Annie actually did, sinking to her knees as tension released its grip on her small frame. Clara and Annie Matthews are officially dead. Morning Star declared, placing her hands on the sisters' shoulders. Their spirits have departed, leaving their suffering behind. Talks with spirits rose from her place by the council fire, her ancient voice carrying surprising strength. When one life ends, another may begin. Tonight, these children shall receive their true names, Apache names, to mark their rebirth. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Clara had experienced, mystical, yet grounded, spiritual, yet intensely personal. The tribe gathered in concentric circles around a sacred fire, fed with herbs that released sweet-smelling smoke. Drums pulsed like heartbeats as talks with spirits led the sisters to the innermost circle. These children came to us as strangers, carrying names given by those who betrayed their trust, the old woman announced. Tonight they shed those names as a snake sheds its skin, emerging renewed. She turned first to Annie. This young one, whose spirit grows stronger each day, like a sapling reaching for the sun, will now be known as Brave Heart, for her courage in facing darkness, where others would have surrendered to despair. Annie, now Brave Heart, stood straighter, her eyes reflecting firelight and newfound purpose, as tribal members called out her name in welcome. When talks with spirits faced Clara, her clouded eyes seemed to peer directly into the girl's soul. And this one, who protected her sister with the fierceness of a mother bear, who has walked through fire and emerged tempered rather than consumed, will now be known as Stands Tall, for she refused to be broken by those who sought to bend her. Stands Tall, a name that spoke not of what had been done to her, but of how she had responded with resilience, with dignity, with an unwillingness to surrender her true self despite everything. As the celebration continued around them, Morning Star approached the sisters, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Nighthawk would be proud, she said softly. He believed names hold power, that the right name can shape a destiny. I wish he were here. Stands Tall replied, throat tight with emotion. Perhaps he is in the way that matters most. Morning Star suggested, gesturing toward their hearts. Those we love never truly leave us while we carry their courage forward. As the night deepened, an unexpected figure approached their fire. Black Knife, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. There is something you should know, he said without preamble. Something I've held back until I was certain. All three turned to him with immediate concern. No. When I returned from setting the false trail, Black Knife continued, his voice lowered to avoid being overheard. I found signs near Devil's Canyon, marks left intentionally for those who know how to read them. Apache signs. What kind of signs? Morning Star asked, tension evident in her posture. A message. 2 crossed arrows pointing south. A hawk's feather. Black Knife met their stunned gazes directly. Signs that could only have been left by one man. Nighthawk, Stands Tall, breathed hope, flaring painfully in her chest. He's alive. Black Knife held up a cautioning hand. I cannot promise that. The signs were old weeks at least. But if he survived somehow, well, he would find us. Morning Star finished, her voice barely audible. He would follow. The revelation added a bittersweet note to their celebration, hope tempered by the knowledge that if Nighthawk truly lived, his journey to rejoin them would be perilous beyond imagining. Wounded alone, crossing territories, crawling with soldiers and hostiles, the odds against his survival were overwhelming. Yet as Stands Tall gazed into the flames that night, she found herself believing in the impossible. Nighthawk had already done what couldn't be done, saved 2 children from a fate worse than death, defied his own brother, created a family from the ashes of multiple tragedies. If anyone could return from the dead, it would be him. The caravan crossed into Mexico 3 weeks later, finding refuge with a band of Chiricahua Apache, led by a chief who had once known Nighthawk's father. They were welcomed given time to establish new lodges, to begin healing from the trauma of displacement. Life gradually found new rhythms. Braveheart thrived her natural curiosity, making her an eager student of Apache ways. Under Morning Star's patient tutelage, she showed particular talent with healing plants, her small hands surprisingly skilled at preparing medicines. Stan's Tall discovered her own gifts, steady hands and practical mind, making her adept at crafting tools and weapons. Though unusual skills for an Apache girl, the tribe respected her abilities, particularly after she designed improvements to their hunting bows that increased both range and accuracy. More surprising was her evolving relationship with Black Knife. His initial hostility had transformed first into grudging respect, then into something approaching friendship. He taught her tracking and hunting skills traditionally reserved for boys, with gruff encouragement that masked genuine admiration for her determination. Months passed. Though no one spoke of it openly, every arrival of traders or travelers brought renewed hope that Nighthawk might somehow have followed them. Each disappointment was borne silently, particularly by Morning Star, whose eyes still searched the horizon when she thought no one was watching. One trader brought news that Madame Blackwood had left Devil's Crossing, her quest for vengeance, apparently abandoned after discovering the remains of the Matthews sisters. The Scarlet Peacock had never been rebuilt, the site now occupied by a respectable hotel catering to the increasing number of settlers arriving by the new railway spur. Clara Matthews and Annie Matthews existed now only in official records, noting their tragic deaths, victims of exposure and wild animals after escaping their Apache kidnappers. Their true story of a father's betrayal, a madam's cruelty, and an Apache warrior's salvation remained known only to those who had lived it. 6 months after their arrival in Mexico, as spring painted the desert in brief, brilliant wildflowers stands tall, sat with Morning Star by the stream that ran through their new camp, learning to weave a complex basket pattern. "Your hands are nimble," Morning Star observed. "You learn quickly." Stan's Tall smiled, though her fingers fumbled the intricate crossover. Not quickly enough, it seems. "Patience is also a skill to be learned," Morning Star replied, with the gentle wisdom that characterized her teaching. "Some patterns reveal their beauty only when complete." A commotion at the camp's edge interrupted their lesson shouts, not of alarm, but surprise. Both looked up to see people running toward the southern approach, where a lone figure had appeared on the horizon. A messenger, perhaps. Stan's Tall suggested setting aside her weaving. But Morning Star had gone completely still. Her hands frozen mid-motion, her eyes fixed on the distant silhouette with an intensity that raised goosebumps on Stan's Tall's arms. "No," she whispered, "not a messenger." Together, they rose, joining the growing crowd at the camp's edge. As the figure drew closer, distinctive features became visible: a tall man, moving with the fluid grace of a natural predator, despite an obvious limp. His copper skin was weathered by sun and hardship, his long black hair streaked with new silver, his face bearing fresh scars alongside old ones. But his eyes, those obsidian eyes that had first noticed 2 terrified girls in a brothel, remained unchanged, filled with the quiet strength that had become Stan's Tall's definition of courage. Nighthawk had found them. The reunion defied description. Joy tangled with disbelief, questions clamoring for answers, embraces that spoke more eloquently than words. Nighthawk was thinner, more deeply scarred, his left leg permanently damaged from injuries sustained in the canyon. But he lived, breathed, stood among them like a spirit made flesh. That evening, by council fire, he told his impossible story, swept downstream by the flood, separated from the preacher in the torrent left for dead on a riverbank, miles from the canyon, found by a hermit prospector who nursed him back from the brink, asking no questions, accepting payment only in hunting and protection during Nighthawk's months of recovery. When I could walk again, he explained, his deep voice carrying easily to the entire gathered tribe. I returned to where our camp had been. Found black knife signs telling of your journey south. I've been following ever since. How did you find us across such distance? Braveheart asked, her young face alight with wonder. The trail must have been impossible after so much time. Nighthawk smiled, a full, unguarded expression that transformed his weathered features. I wasn't tracking footprints, little one. I was tracking family. His gaze swept over Stan's tall, brave heart and finally rested on Morning Star. And the heart always knows the way home. Later that night, as most of the tribe slept, Stan's Tall found Nighthawk sitting alone by the dying council fire. His injured legs stretched before him, his expression contemplative as he gazed at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked quietly. He nodded, gesturing to the space beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before Nighthawk spoke. "Black Knife tells me you have a new name, Stands Tall." He pronounced it with careful respect. "It suits you." "Sometimes I still feel like Clara," she admitted. "Especially in dreams. Is that wrong?" Nighthawk considered this thoughtfully. "Names are like rivers. They may change course over time, carve new paths through the landscape of who we are. But they all flow from the same source." He looked at her directly. "You are both Clara and Stands Tall, just as I am both the warrior who chose vengeance and the man who chose to save two sisters instead." "And the preacher, your brother?" Stands Tall asked hesitantly. Nighthawk's expression darkened. "His body was found. His spirit. I hope it finds peace, though I doubt it. Some choices leave wounds that even death cannot heal." They lapsed into silence again, watching sparks rise from the embers like earthbound stars seeking to rejoin their celestial kin. "What happens now?" Stands Tall finally asked the question that had lingered since Nighthawk's miraculous return. "Now," he replied simply, "we live. We build something new from what remains of the old. We honor those lost by creating something worth their sacrifice." His gaze drifted toward the wickiup where Morning Star slept. Something in his expression, vulnerability perhaps, or hope, made Stands Tall realize that Nighthawk's journey had transformed him as profoundly as their ordeal had changed her. And Braveheart, she never stopped believing you'd return, Stands Tall said softly. "Even when others doubted." Nighthawk nodded, a complex emotion passing across his features. "Some bonds cannot be broken, not by distance, not by time, not even by death's seeming certainty." He looked back at Stands Tall. "Remember that when life brings its inevitable separations, what matters most always finds its way back." 1 month later, as summer heat settled over the land, Nighthawk and Morning Star were united in a ceremony that celebrated not just their bond, but the family they had formed with Stands Tall and Braveheart. The girls stood proudly beside them, no longer orphans, no longer victims, daughters of choice. Rather than blood-bound by something stronger than the circumstances that had brought them together. Life continued to unfold in ways none could have predicted. Braveheart's skill with medicine grew, eventually earning her an apprenticeship with the tribe's most respected healer. Stands Tall developed a close friendship with a young warrior named Swift Deer, whose gentle persistence and quiet humor gradually transformed into a deeper connection that promised future happiness. Nighthawk and Morning Star became respected elders despite their relative youth, their unusual family and extraordinary journey giving them perspectives that bridged worlds and generations. Nighthawk's injuries prevented him from hunting or fighting as he once had, but his wisdom and strategic mind made him invaluable to the tribe's council. Years passed. Word occasionally reached them from north of the border, increasing encroachment on Apache lands, pressure from the U.S. government to relocate to reservations, a changing world where the old ways faced extinction with each passing season. Yet in their remote mountain sanctuary, they maintained essential traditions while adapting to changing times, finding balance between honoring the past and surviving the present. On a crisp autumn evening, nearly 10 years after their escape from Devil's Crossing, stands Tall sat beside Nighthawk on a bluff overlooking their camp. Now a young woman of 22, she had grown into her name, confident, resilient, respected within the tribe, recently married to Swift Deer, whose patience had finally won her heart. "I had a letter from the settlement," she said, breaking their comfortable silence. Literacy was among the skills she had maintained and taught to others, allowing occasional communication with trusted traders. "Madam Blackwood died last winter in San Francisco." Nighthawk absorbed this news thoughtfully. "Does her death bring you peace?" Stands Tall considered the question. "Not peace exactly. I stopped hating her years ago. Hating takes too much energy to maintain." She traced a pattern in the dust beside her. "But knowing she can never threaten another child." "Yes, there's relief in that. The greatest victory over an enemy," Nighthawk observed, "is to live so fully they become irrelevant to your story." Stands Tall smiled at the wisdom that had guided their family through countless challenges. "Braveheart is expecting a child," she said, changing the subject to happier news. "She wanted me to tell you first." Nighthawk's weathered face lit with joy. "The first grandchild. The spirits are generous indeed. She wants to name the baby Singing Hawk, if it's a boy, to honor both your wife and you." Stands Tall watched his reaction carefully, aware that references to his first family could still bring pain alongside the healing years had brought. But Nighthawk merely nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "A good name. A bridge between worlds." As sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Stands Tall reflected on the long, improbable journey from terror to peace. Clara and Annie Matthews had died not in a staged scene of bones and belongings, but in the transformation that had forged Stands Tall and Braveheart from their ashes. They had been stolen children, forced into adulthood too soon. But they had also been found protected, loved. Nighthawk's courage, his unyielding determination to save them despite his own wounds, had changed not just their lives, but the lives of all who would come after them. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Saving us that night, all it cost you?" Nighthawk considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Regret suggests an alternative I would have preferred. There is none." His gaze swept over the camp below, where Braveheart could be seen laughing with her husband, where Morning Star sat teaching basket weaving to younger women, where life unfolded with all its imperfect beauty. "Some paths choose us. This one brought me home when I thought home was forever lost." As they descended the bluff to rejoin their family for the evening meal, Stands Tall carried those words in her heart, a testament to how courage, compassion, and choice could transform even the darkest beginning into a story worth living. For in saving Clara and Annie Matthews, Nighthawk had also saved himself, creating something precious and rare in the harsh borderlands, a family built on choice rather than obligation, on love, freely given rather than demanded, on shared resilience that transcended the boundaries of blood and history. And in that achievement lay a victory more profound than any won by force of arms, the triumph of compassion over cruelty, of hope over despair, of the human capacity to begin again, no matter how dark the night that came before the dawn.